welcome to the discussion on the partition of India. We have very prominent personalities on the panel today, and this is an issue that has been impacting, it manifested into a far-reaching global geopolitical cross-current. So we are looking forward to really introspecting and understanding what exactly transpired since 1947 and beyond. So let me introduce our esteemed panelists. We have Sukhi Chahal, the chairman of Punjab Foundation. Welcome, Sukhi. He's an alumnus of Stanford University, and he's worked in engineering with Netflix, with Intel, Stanford Healthcare, etc. His foundation is based out of the Silicon Valley. It's a nonprofit and provides educational support for underprivileged kids in India. He has also been on the board of various other nonprofit organizations like the Dream and Beauty Charitable Trust, with its founder and chairman. And he has been living in the Valley for many years now, bridging relationships between the Hindu, Sikh, and Jewish communities. So he was born in the district of Mansa of Punjab and migrated to the United States in 1992. Good to see you, Sukhi. And we have Dr. Anirban Ganguly. He's the director of Dr. Sama Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation based out of New Delhi. And he is an eminent speaker, thought leader, public individual. He's been on the board of the Central Advisory Board of Education, which is CABE. He's a member of Indian National Commission for Cooperation with UNESCO. He has been in the Ministry of Culture, the governing board of Orville Foundation as well. And he's authored a number of books, among which is Education, Philosophy, and Practice in 2011, Swami Vivekananda, Buddha and Buddhism 2014, Debating Culture 2013, so on and so forth. He's a scholar of civilizational history, politics, and culture. And he's a columnist with a number of dailies, including Times of India. And welcome, Anirban. It's very good to see you.
Thank you so much.
Namaste. And our third panelist, Avatans, is actually coordinating all the efforts of Indic Academy in the United States. So many of us know him already. He holds graduate degrees in linguistics from JNU and University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And he's also taught linguistics and Hindi as a foreign language, respectively, in that university. He has been published in his Hindi poems as well. He's an eminent columnist, public speaker, and activist. Avatans currently leads the US operations of Indic Academy, incorporated as Indica Incorporated. It's a nonprofit organization in US that seeks to bring about a global renaissance based on Indic civilizational thought. And Avatans resides in the US as well. So welcome, Avatans. It's good to see you.
Namaste. It's good to be in this eminent panel here.
Namaste, welcome everybody. But we'll start with Sukhi on what exactly happened in 1947 in Punjab.
Somanjana, 1947 is pretty much, we can say, is the biggest tragedy, the violent tragedy with the people of Punjab, or we can say, because what we have heard and the first-hand information from our the father figures and the people, those who are in like 85-plus-year-old still alive. And the story which we heard from them, actually like 15 million people being displaced and more than 2 million people getting killed in this violent the migration. And this is the tragedy. This is the story which has not been told properly, has not been documented properly. Especially the new generation has to know. what happened at that time and why did it happen, and so what we can learn from there, especially from these kind of tragedies. Especially the Sikh population and the Punjabis actually. So while we can say on the Bengal side actually, so you can give me your side of story on this side actually, because we have to understand the history behind a little bit. And so when the British took over the India, and the Punjab part was pretty much the last part actually, so they were able to capture. And because it was ruled by the Maharaja Ranjit Singh, that was the Sikh Raj. It was pretty much starting from the Afghanistan border to Jammu and Lahore and Peshawar and even up to Tibet. It was huge actually, so the Khalsa Raj. And when it took over after that actually, so when partition happened actually, so while we say it's a partition of India, right, and India and Pakistan, and we say it's a partition of Punjab because the people was very prosperous and the Sikh people, Punjabi people in that area, and they were the defender of India at the time because the people, all the attacks on India actually, so were coming from the Afghanistan, and so we were the kind of buffer zone. And this is a big tragedy happened, and many people get killed at the time, and kind of brutality happened. It is eye-opener actually, because when you talk to any person in Punjab in these days, actually, even people anywhere in the world actually, so those who have seen it, you talk to them, they will cry like a kid actually, because it was so horrible. And how many rapes happened and how many killing happened during that time, and it was tragedy. It was a tragedy, and so that's why the people have seen it, and hopefully actually so we can learn some lesson from there, and why it happened, because the Sikhs were the third largest population at the time, because after Hindus and Muslim. And so their contribution, and the Sikhs contribution was huge actually for as a defender of India actually. So when it's come to the unity and the integrity and the hard work what we have done, so going to leaving their place and suddenly overnight coming to India side and getting slaughtered all over, it was a tragedy. It is a pain. It was a very painful story actually. So.
Thank you, Sukhi. So if you can just let us know quickly that what happened for repatriation when you moved, and then subsequently we know about the Sikh massacre happening in 1984. So how did that come about? If you can just let us know quickly.
Sikh massacre actually, because nobody was mentally prepared actually. So these Sikhs at the last minute actually, so they were not properly advised, properly told actually, so that they have to migrate on the India side actually, right? Because the people, there was no way actually. So in the history, you go back to in the history, you have to take a look on the philosophy of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, and you have to understand actually, so philosophy of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, because not only Sikh has to know the philosophy, and even I think actually every Hindu needs to understand the philosophy of the Guru Gobind Singh, because Guru Gobind Singh, the Sikh philosophy is not only for the Sikhs, and this is the philosophy for everybody, because we call it Sravat Kapala. So we call actually, because we kind of relationship and the Hindu Sikhs has actually, so it's unbreakable bond. So that's why like when this partition happened and the people has to move over there, and many, because all they were getting killed over there, all the villages were being massacred actually at that time, and so many during that time actually the Sikh women, instead of getting captured and getting raped by these people, and so they decided to get them killed by themselves. They put the petrol on themselves, and so they burned themselves actually, so because they don't want to compromise their integrity or dignity. And there's many of the girls actually, so even there is so many events happen in the 1947 actually, so that like even they decided to pretty much throw themselves actually in the wells, in the villages actually, so instead of getting captured actually, because all these atrocities happened at that time, many people actually, especially the Punjabi and Sikh, killed over there. So that's it was a very like a sad part in the, and I would say it was one of the biggest blunder even the British did actually, so during that time.
Mhm. Thank you, Sukhi. Thanks for giving us this perspective. I would move to Dr. Anirban Ganguly about the perspective from Bengal. We know that Lord Curzon tried to partition us way before in 1905. And it's important to know what was going on in Europe that time. You know, UK was at the verge of the First World War, and they definitely needed people to fight the war for themselves. But the partition attempt in 1905 failed, and the Bengal leadership rose to the occasion. And then subsequently, a lot of stuff happened, and we eventually had the partition in 1947. But we would hear from the scholar. So, Anirban, welcome. If you could share this side of the history, please.
Thank you so much, and I'm extremely grateful and delighted for having been invited here. And it's very interesting the manner in which you have put up the panel, because Sukhi ji, besides being a very well-known and celebrated personality in the Indian community in the US, also represents that ethos and that psyche of the Western partition, of India's partition on the Western front. And you have by inviting me, you have put the India's partition on the Eastern front. So we have to realize that in the partition history of India, the story of India's partition has been quite different on the Western front and on the Eastern front. Now you see, I'll just start with a small observation. Many people that you meet, many diplomats, foreign diplomats in India, and otherwise also, where foreign experts on India, quote unquote experts, will tell you that the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act passed by the Indian Parliament, is fine, it's perfect. It's absolutely, we agree with it, except that you need not have put that, differentiation on religious basis. The citizenship on religious basis, you should not have put that. Otherwise, that's fine. But whoever says this forgets that India's partition was based on religion. It was not a secular partition. It was not a partition that happened the manner that happened in Korea, between North Korea and South Korea. That was an ideological, that was a secular partition. It had no religious implications or element in it. Therefore, when we talk about the Citizenship Amendment Act, which we say is the conclusion of a long history, of a long open-ended chapter in history, in India's partition history, we must not forget that India's partition was based on religion, one. Second is, unlike the Western Front, on the Eastern Front in the partition, the Eastern Front partition did not see a complete exchange of population. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee demanded a complete exchange of population. If you are partitioning, let us partition completely, let us exchange completely, and let us get this episode over once for all. Nehru, for strange reasons, refused to do that. And therefore, we see that while the Western part of the partition, the Western theater of partition, was as bloody, was as difficult, was as heartrending as the Eastern part, as the Eastern theater, but the Western theater had a closure at a certain point of time. And then whatever any of those Hindus who came away from Punjab or from Sindh came in a trickle, because in any case there was a major exchange of population that took place on the Western Front. And on 7th August 1950, when there was this debate going on in Parliament, and when Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee reminded Nehru that you did not hesitate to have an exchange of population on the Western Front, what is stopping you from having that in the Eastern Front? Nehru said an exchange of population will be spiritually, economically, culturally disastrous for India. So then Dr. Mukherjee asked him the question, why didn't you keep this logic? Why didn't you apply this logic when on the Western Front? So therefore, please put this logic in cold storage and have a complete exchange of population on the Eastern Front, but it was not done. The second aspect of the Eastern Front partition was that the refugees who came across from East Bengal, later East Pakistan, were given relief and not rehabilitation. Because Nehru insisted, there was always this narrative that he had built because Patel was dead by 1950. Nehru insisted that all those who came from East Bengal must go back to East Bengal without even ensuring where they would go back. Because once you had to leave your home and hearth, you never knew whether you would get them back once you went back because they were occupied. And the third and the last point, if I just want to put it in a nutshell, the third and the last point is that the Eastern Front saw a continued pogrom of the Bengali Hindu minorities, which started in January 1950 and continued till October 2001, when there was a BNP government of Khalida Zia which came to power. After 2001, it has reduced. The scale has drastically come down. After the BNP government was finally ousted, the Jamaat-e-Islami coalition broke apart and an Awami League government has been installed in power. I'm not saying that the problem doesn't exist. It does. But pogrom of that magnitude started in January 1950 and continued till 2001. And that was because Nehru had refused at that time to have an exchange of population. So this is how I look at the three dimensions of the Eastern Front, Eastern Theater of Partition. There are two more points, but I think, I just want to make a very peculiar point. I want to point out to a very peculiar incident that took place in January 1948. That was not even just 6 months after independence. A group of eminent Gandhian leaders, Congress leaders, eminent Gandhians, who had come away, who were forced to come away from East Bengal into West Bengal, attended the Jaipur session of the All India Congress Committee, AICC. And they had gone prepared that they would present a memorandum to Panditji and tell him that we, the Bengali Hindu refugees, require rehabilitation. We cannot go back. There is no way that we can go back and reclaim our land and live there with dignity. We have tried, but we were unable to. That's why we require the Indian government to give us rehabilitation and not only relief. And when they went and met Panditji in Jaipur during the AICC session, he looked at them extremely flabbergasted and irritated, saying that you should not come to me with this issue. You should go to the Foreign Affairs Department of the Congress with this issue. So by 1948 January, he had already started looking at the Bengali Hindu refugees as foreigners who necessarily could not stay on in India and had to be convinced to go back. And then, there are, of course, layers into this, the entire Nehru-Liaquat Pact, which failed, etc. And then, situations had developed, Jogendranath Mandal, why he had to come away, the entire Dalit, the marginalized sections had to migrate, and etc. Until we come to the 1971 Bangladesh war. Sidney Schanberg's reports in the New York Times. And you see the continuation of that problem even in 71, when the largest chunk of refugees came away to India.
That was most heart-wrenching to see that what the people have gone through, and they were not really accepted by the then government of India. You talked about not having rehabilitation. So what exactly happened in the refugee quarters? I mean, how were they living? I mean, did they have a place to go at all in West Bengal?
No, they did not. You see, let's accept it, because this was a problem of a huge magnitude. And West Bengal and we were fortunate enough that a portion of Bengal was saved. And because that's when Dr. Shyam Prasad Mukherjee raised the demand, when you spoke about the Bengal partition of 1905. And on March 27th, 1947, just a few months before independence, Dr. Mukherjee gave out a public statement where he says, where he had already demanded that Bengal be partitioned between the Hindu majority areas, which wanted to be with India. And he was very clear. He says that, look, the Hindus did not ask for partition. The Hindus did not demand for partition of India. And the irony was that, and he pointed this out even in his resignation statement in Parliament, that the majority of those who demanded partition, who demanded Pakistan, actually stayed back in India. They didn't migrate to Pakistan. So this is one of the greatest ironies of partition history, that those loudmouths, those blackmailers in that sense, who demanded Pakistan, stayed back. Majority of them stayed back in India. And that was when Sardar Patel in 1948 January in Lucknow and in Kolkata gave that famous public address of his, against which people had gone and complained to Mahatma Gandhi that Patel was blackmailing, Patel was being tough. Patel had said, look, he had exactly said this. He had said those who had demanded Pakistan, majority of them have not gone to Pakistan, they have stayed back in India. So it is natural that we look upon you with suspicion until you prove yourself worthy of faith and say that you are going to live in India equally and work for India's unity in future. Well, that was a part. But now the point is that, you see, there was just relief. Relief meant pavement of the Howrah station or the Sialdah station in Kolkata, for those of you who have seen it. The pavement of Howrah and Sialdah station, some ramshackle tents somewhere put up, and that's it. And some ration coming their way, living cheek to jowl in the most difficult conditions. Imagine a family overnight living in a mansion or being very, very, very well off, having hundreds of acres of land in East Bengal, overnight having to come and subsist and survive on the pavement of Sialdah station. This was the kind of relief that was given. And Nehru was adamant. There are correspondences between Dr. B.C. Roy and Jawaharlal Nehru. There are debates and discussions and fights in Parliament. He was absolutely adamant that they will have to go back, because you have to salvage the idea of a secular India. And therefore they have to go back. And the best part of it, the ironical part of it, was the Nehru-Liaquat Pact insisted that minorities in either countries would be looked after. Starting from Dr. Mukherjee and all the many senior leaders of that time, even Congress leaders like Pandit Lakshmikant Maitra, who was the first member of parliament from Navadvip, member of the Constituent Assembly, kept saying that, look, we are carrying out our duty towards our minorities. In fact, no minority, even those who had gone off to East Bengal from West Bengal, minorities who had gone back to East Bengal, who had gone because they wanted to be in Pakistan, within a few months, many of them even came back to West Bengal, because they realized even being a Muslim, they couldn't survive. They couldn't in that strangulating atmosphere that was Pakistan. So this is how the Bengali Hindu refugees was looked after. And so you had the refugees from Punjab coming in absolutely, but since there was this exchange of population, since the Western, after the refugees came, especially to Delhi and to these areas, a very tough life, they began from scratch, but because they were rehabilitated, they again grew into a very strong and mighty community, which the Bengali Hindu refugees could never, because of this approach, that peculiar approach that Nehru had.
Very interesting. I think most of us didn't really know what happened in the aftermath. There was so much of conflict and chaos, and we see, both regions, both Punjab and West Bengal, have been affected by various kinds of anarchists, separatists, ideologues trying to make way there. But before we move on to, learning more about Punjab and West Bengal, I would like to invite Avatans. He's an academic, and so the narratives that we are sharing now on the partition, what do you have to say about the campus, what was going on in India and also in the United States? I mean, do we hear these stories in the institutions, in the campuses at all?
The short answer is no. But before I do, I would like to thank you and Indic Academy to be on this panel, and I'm really fortunate to be in this august company. Um, and if you can see, I'm wearing my JNU shirt and have my Illinois cup representing both campuses very well. And I am very proud, wherever I go, when I talk about my education, people, the moment they hear JNU, there's all kinds of reaction, but I'm very fortunate and proud to be a JNU alumnus. I got to be, taught by some of the very, very good scholars and professors and acharyas. So in
Same
that
here.
sense,
Although
yes,
Avatar is way senior, but yeah, both of us
yes.
share the same thoughts.
Exactly. So I'm fortunate. But, Anirbanji talked about some of the tragedies, and Sukhiji also. And I shared this information about this webinar on my Facebook page. And one of my friends said, I don't even want to talk about it because it's so mind-boggling, it's so hurtful. And this is not just one friend. I have so many friends even here, and their parents migrated. When I talk to them, they said they don't know anything. Their parents don't even talk about it. The trauma is so huge. And that is the problem with history writing. We have a lot of problem in writing history in general, because the way the history is written is very faulty and biased. Because remember, E.H. Carr, when we talk about E.H. Carr, he writes, what is history? He says, well, history, the facts are like fish floating in a pond, and the historians pick those fishes and they cook it according to their taste. So it's all about opinions. And when you talk about, again, Professor S.N. Balagangadhar, Professor Balu, he talks about, there's nothing historical, there's nothing scientific and critical about this history writing. All it is, the BS sold as science is history, is what he basically says. And then we have to also look at the history writing in terms of India's history writing. There's a lot of problem there, because most of the people who wrote about Indian history are foreigners. Okay, during the time, Indologists, we come to mind. The Indologists, they wrote a lot about India, and if you read some of the recent research by, for example, Professor Vishwa Daluri and Professor Joydeep Bagchi, they write about their biases, and they say that the Indologists did not believe that we even have access to our own texts that have been handed down to us for 5,000 years. We don't have access, so somebody else needs to tell us what our text means, so what our culture means, what our history means, what our itihas means, what our Quran means. Okay, so, and then we come to the writing of history of partition, and it's basically, we have come down to is a point in time, 1947. That's pretty much it. We discuss it as a chronology, as an event and calendar. Not much is written. But if you look at some of the prehistory of 1947, the partition, and post-history of 1947, there isn't much in terms of academics. So people recently have started collecting stories, memoirs, and artists have started doing some of those things. But academic level, there isn't much. After independence, quote unquote, we have nationalist historians writing about partition. Well, Marxists are not nationalists, so they can never be nationalists. So though we don't have a nationalist narrative of partition. Okay, so going back, if I can go back, people talk about 30, 40 years prior to partition is the history. No, I think we can go back and talk about a partition from all the way when the British came. That's when the roots of partition, the two nation theory, started to creep in the, the Muslim rule was getting weaker. And by the time the British came, all the aristocracy, they went back, right? And then one of the main figures of two-nation theory, if you read some of the literature, is Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. Okay, and he has a lot of things. I know we have two Bengalis here. He has a lot of things to say about Bengalis, and I will read some of his quotes. But some of the interesting talks. He goes to Meerut in 1888, and he's talking about. He's giving a speech, and he says, "Now suppose that all English and the whole English army were to leave India, taking with them all their cannon and their splendid weapon and everything, then who would be the rulers of India? It is possible. Is it possible that under these circumstances, two nations, the Mohammedans and the Hindus, could sit on the same throne and remain equal in power? Most certainly not. It is necessary that one of them should conquer the other and thrust it down. To hope that both could remain equal is to desire the impossible and inconceivable." This is Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, and we have a huge public funded university in his honor. We don't know about, nobody talks about it. You talked about narrative and campus, but we don't hear about this. Who says, "Oh, my brother Muslims, I again remind you that you have ruled nations and have for centuries held different countries in your grasp. For 700 years in India, so you know how to rule," he says. This is his quote, and you can go and look it up. It's all from Columbia University website. They have a huge collection of works. So we haven't talked about the prehistory, past history, after 1947. What has happened? Well, we have not seen, one of the things that happened, and now I'm coming back to campus in the US, is India has disappeared from all narrative, academic narrative. It has become South Asia. Indian subcontinent has disappeared. It has become South Asia. Hindu has disappeared. It has become South Asian religion. All Indic religions have become South Asian religions. So there is no Buddhism, there is no Jainism, there is no Sikhism, and definitely not Hinduism. They all have become South Asian religion. So that's the narrative in the US campus. And now you see we have South Asian departments of South Asian studies in India. Used to be Department of Indology. Prior to that, when the Germans were doing it, it had some India in it. But we completely lost that India part, Hindu part, after 1947, the world over. Another part we don't necessarily talk about is the language. Urdu, suddenly people who spoke for generations, Punjabi, Sindhi, suddenly realized that now they have to talk Urdu. They have to learn Urdu. Because in the Pakistani, the western part of India, nobody knew Urdu. It was the language of Biharis and UP walas. Those who, like Anirban said, voted for partition. But now suddenly there is a new language to deal with for them. So somehow the Bengali people did not buy that. And we have different, Bangladesh come up. Okay.
Avatans, what you're saying is like most fascinating in the sense that after partition, now we have suppression. So first we were parted, and now they suppress our narrative. So it's all in collective, the South Asian basket. So we don't even have an identity of our own. This is extremely tragic, and the Islamist lobby, like you mentioned, obviously are continuing with the same narrative.
I just wanted to make one quick point that we have not only lost narrative, but when we talk about our narrative, we are called all sorts of names. You know,
Right, right.
Hindutva hand and this hand, that hand.
Yeah,
Hindu
then it's it's all in a derogatory sense that you want to talk about your history. How dare
right,
you?
right,
That is what is coming up right now.
right.
So with that, thank you, Avatans. I'll move to Sukhi. Obviously, rehabilitation for the Punjabi people, have the Sikh people, have not been easy in the land. We all know the horrors that transpired in 1984 with the demise of Indira Gandhi, then how Pakistan have been, they flooded the area with guns, with drugs, with illegal immigration of people and substances, and the holiest of places, the Sikh temple, the Golden Temple, have also been targeted in the past. So Suki, please tell us what happened.
Yeah, so Maji, before I answer that question, actually, so three very important question already been raised by Ganguly Saab and Kumar Saab. Mr. Ganguly Saab, he mentioned rehabilitation, especially on the western part, right? And also he also mentioned the partition based upon the religion, right? And Kumar Saab also mentioned the history should be retold. These are very critical, very important part because not too many people understand. History needs to be told actually because why the Sikh people, Punjabi people, they came to US more than 100 years back in 1900. We live in San Francisco area, not too many people know exactly. So what was the contribution of the Ghadar people, the people those who start the Ghadar movement? And these people, they established the Ghadar movement in the Berkeley, you see Berkeley in San Francisco area during that time, actually, so when discrimination was on the peak. And why they did it, why they went back, actually, so what was their contribution to get the freedom of like to kick the British out of India. And also we have to we have to tell the history to our new generation, what happened in Vancouver in Kamangata Maru. And who were these people? Why they came over there when they brought the whole ship? They went back to Calcutta. What happened to them? We also need to tell them, these people, that what happened to the Sikhs, actually, because being less than 2%, actually, so we have to go take a look in the Andaman Nicobar Deep Samur, and we have to see actually what happened in the cellular jail, how many people were the Sikhs over there. So that's where Sikhs was everywhere, actually, so when it comes to the contribution to the, especially as a defender to the India. Right, and so that's where the people and the Sikh at that time, the Sikh leadership at that time, they were naive actually, because they were not politically that strong. Right, they had an option to seek for the separate state. They choose to come with India because they knew actually because now the partition being done based on the religion, what will happen to them? And so that's because they know the history. In history, what happened to Guru Gobind Singh's son? What happened actually because all the Islamic rulers, those who came to India, what was the first agenda? To convert them everywhere actually. So all these conversions happen in India at the massive scale. It is still happening inside the Pakistan. If the Sikhs could have chosen to stay with the Pakistan at the time, and my name could have been Sukhi Khan or something like that, because by this time actually all the Sikhs could have been converted, and all what is happening inside the Pakistan, that's a very clear indication actually, because whatever the Sikh leadership at that time did, that was the right move. But unfortunately at the same time, as during that time, the people, those who ruled the India after the partition, they were not very fair to the Sikh community. So that's why they were resentment actually, because whatever the promise was made to them by these the Congress government at the time, at least, so they were not delivered. So that's why they have to fight for the for their rights. And this is the ongoing and the continuous, likely from the even before the 47 and after the 47 too. And what happened during the emergency, and who were the people? It were the Sikh people from the Punjab side actually who went to the jails to fight against the emergency. So that's why then after that the narrative was being built up actually. So then the Akalis were also looking for their own area actually, because earlier the Punjab is used to call Pepsu Punjab. And so that's why they have to seek where they have their own state actually, so where they can also live peacefully. So that's why like they have to divide actually. Earlier the Punjab, the Maha Punjab, we call it bigger Punjab, Pepsi Punjab, it was Haryana, Himachal and Punjab was one state actually. So then after that actually, so they have to fight. So again, although given all the contribution of the Sikhs people has in the India, the agriculture area and the sports and especially the bravery, and took a look at the Indian army today. Having all these contributions, there was just some resentment and still exists today. It happens because 1984 actually, so you mentioned Darbar Sahib actually, because Sikhs were not the terrorists, Sikhs were the defender of the India, and the Sikhs and the Hindu people actually, so you cannot see them separate. Early, if you go back to before 70, and you will see every Hindu gentleman, families in Punjab actually, so they used to make their first son or the daughter as a Sikh people. Even the people in Punjab actually, so they used to be the turban, right? And so now suddenly, so the narratives was started actually, so start building up actually, so no, these people are very hard-headed actually, so they fight this and that actually, so they, yeah. So then, but during that time, the Pakistan took the advantage of the situation. The Pakistan ISI actually, so they bring the phenomena of the, like they are looking for the Khalistan, which is totally ridiculous. Actually, it was never demanded by the Sikhs, and it is never, even today actually, so the people, those who are talking about the Khalistan, I don't even consider them the Sikh people, because if we are talking about the Khalistan, I'm talking about the whole India. For me, it's today Khalistan actually, because Khalistan means the pure. Because everywhere you go, Guru Gobind Singh was born in Patna. It is in Bihar. It is not in Punjab, right? Where was Guru Tegh Bahadur came from? Right? He came from Bihar, he came to Punjab, and what is the background of all the Sikh gurus actually? So if I go back in my history, if I go 300 years back, like I will find out, so my history is also connected to the Hindu community too. So that's why that cannot be separated out actually, because that history needs to be told to the new generation actually, the people, though, because these some of the forces, anti-Indian forces, especially the Pakistani, they are getting into the, especially the Sikh religious affairs actually. So they have been very successful. They are the one actually who trying to create a narrative that we are anti-Sikh, we are anti-Indian, Sikhs are anti-Indian. No, you see, when the people came over here, so they were rehabilitated, and Sikh has been very hard work. They have been progressed within India and outside India too. They are very hard worker. They are very loyal to India, and you can see their contribution every field. So that's why, because of that actually, so during that time, what happened in 1984 in the attack on the Darbar Sahib, it was after partition, that was the second blunder actually, so they have done, doing the attack on the Darbar Sahib. There could have been much better option actually, right? Then after that actually, so what happened to this Mrs. Gandhi get killed over there. So they people, all the Sikh people in the thousand actually, so get slaughtered actually. This kind of genocide happened for 3 days, and killing happened over there. But at that time actually, after 30 more than 30 years, justice was not served. So that's why Sikh has some issues actually. So they have a genuine issue, because it took almost more than 30 years for the consistent government at that time to suppress actually. So the freedom, their justice was delayed, it was denied to them. Fortunately, lately, when Mr. Modi came in, and I asked so many people, even the radical people, actually, so tell us actually what is the resentment we have with the BJP right now, because they have been very fair to the Sikh community, and we do not have any issue with especially the current BJP government, because the 550th birthday of the Guru Nanak Dev Ji was celebrated at the grand scale throughout the world. right? 350th birthday of the Guru Gobind Singh was celebrated throughout the world at a grand scale. The blacklist was, which was the people from Punjab during the terrorism, those who settled outside at least, so they were in the blacklist. The blacklist was pruned. The people, those who, because of the terrorism was, which was started by the Pakistani agencies in the Punjab, and the youth was, Punjab was destroyed, and all the drugs was pumped in the Punjab, at least. So because of that, many people like us, I'm also one of them, we came and we have to seek the refuge in the other country. So then there was an issue, at least. So then we were not able to go back. And I'm really thankful to the central government, today's government, at least. So they were able to issue the passports to anyone who has seeken the refugee status outside India. And having said that, actually after that, like in the 1984, and many people had already been gone to the jail, right? And also many cases have been being opened. All the political prison, many political prisoners are being released. But unfortunately, there are a bunch of, few of them, I cannot say sick, because when we say Sikhs are not, we should not, we have to tell the story, we have to tell the history, because these people, those who are protest in front of the Indian consulate or anywhere in front of all these embassies, I don't consider them the Sikh, because actually they are the Gadar of the Sikhs, actually because of these people, actually because all the whatever our gurus have done, whatever their philosophy was that, so they are miles away from them. So that's why actually, so that story has to be told to the new generation, that history has to be rewritten. We have to tell that what is the contribution of the Sikh people, what the Sikh people are, what is their history is, and their Guru's history is. When Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib came, gave his sacrifice, and there were the other four people, who were them? That history also we told, at least. So they were all four Hindu people, at least. So when Guru Tegh Bahadur was sacrificed in New Delhi, so when who was Banda Bahadur? Banda Bahadur was the Hindu guy, actually. So that's why when the Khalsa first, who established the first Khalsa Raj, and so what happened to the kids of Guru Gobind Singh, and why they were killed, and who killed them, and what was the reason, actually? So because they disagree to get converted to Islam, so that's why they got slaughtered. All that history narrative has to be changed, actually, because unfortunately, as you mentioned earlier, actually, so as Kumar sir mentioned too, actually, because their narrative is very wrong. People has been like, we are being projected, actually, we are anti-India. No, for me, India is first, because this is my Karampumi, India is my Janampumi, India is the whole India, is like, there's just so many Gurdwaras. You go to Bihar, you go to Maharashtra, you go to Bidar, you go to any like Delhi, everywhere, because how can we even think about being away from India, actually? So that's why India, for us, India, like the contribution of the Sikh people is huge, and it has been, and it will be, and you can see even in the latest army too, actually. So whenever it's come to defending India, Sikhs are always there, and it has to be there, because that's what has been told. That is the philosophy of Guru Gobind Singh, and that's the philosophy of Guru Nanak Dev Ji. That philosophy has to be told, especially, as I mentioned earlier, every Hindu gentleman need to understand the philosophy of Guru Gobind Singh and also Guru Nanak Dev. That has to learn. Once you learn their history, once you learn their philosophy, they will understand actually so what they need to do next.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So cute to give us this holistic perspective. Obviously, we cannot separate our Sikh brothers and sisters from the Hindu brothers and sisters. And there's been a long history that has been twisted, and we see it in California. You and I both live, we know how much you fight this separatist narratives, and you're bringing forward the true philosophical aspect of Sikhism to the community. So thank you. We are very grateful for the work that you are doing, not just in the United States, but worldwide. So I would like to move to Anirban with this, because in West Bengal, we know you shortly mentioned about the Dalit massacre, the Marikchapi. Then we had communism for 3 decades. And recently we see the current state government is putting substantial efforts on Islamization of our history books, our narratives, also letting illegal immigrants from Bangladesh coming in. And CAA is obviously, there's a lot of misrepresentation, misinformation going on. So the region has gone through so many different kind of turbulence, philosophically, ideologically, socially, economically, spiritually. Anirban, the floor is yours. You have to unmute.
I'm sorry. Yeah, there's one I don't know because since all of you are based in the US and we are having a discussion on partition, on refugees. I don't know how far this book has really been discussed, but I had read it 5 years ago. I keep referring to it, but I'm convinced that there has again been a certain conspiracy of silence against this book, Gary Bass's Blood Telegram, because this is a book I think which we must keep referring to, especially when we want to know the 71 phase, the Bangladesh Liberation War, and in that we particularly, this book is interesting for me because particularly there's a lot to do with what Edward Kennedy at that point of time did as senator, the kind of visit that he undertook in West Bengal, the bordering areas of West Bengal, and the eye-opening visits. And it was an eye-opener for him. And it was because of him and because of Sidney Schanberg that the entire narrative of the 71 war from the perspective of the Bengali Hindu minority in East Pakistan came to light. And I think, so, and when Sukhi ji was talking, I was remembering, because it's all there in my personal collection, Harold Gold's very famous work, Six Swamis, Students and Spies, the way the Indian lobby in the United States really fought for the rights. And right from, and the India lobby in the United States, 1900 to 1946. So that itself is a saga. And when he spoke about the Gadar movement, Lala Hardayal, there's a very concerted attempt to, project him as a Marxist. Well, I mean, Lala Hardayal, if you read his books on the kind of things he's written on Sanskrit, the kind of things he's written on Indian education, one would certainly, I'm sure the Marxists have not read him in his entirety, because they would have certainly disagreed with him. Like the Marxists are silent on what Dr. Ambedkar has said on Pakistan. The Marxists are silent on what Dr. Ambedkar has, the manner in which Dr. Ambedkar had described the Mopla riots, not rebellion. And the Marxists are silent on Jogendranath Mandal, the Dalit Hindu leader who was part of Jinnah's cabinet, the first law minister of Free Pakistan, who could not last in Jinnah's Pakistan more than 3 years. He had to run away to West Bengal. And having done that, his resignation letter, which runs into 20 pages, is a historic document which says why the Bengali Hindus cannot live, cannot hope to have a future in Pakistan. Now, you see, the problem has been, and as I've discussed this quite often, the problem has been that when the Marxists took hold of our social sciences, when the Marxist cartel or the Chicago or California cartels, academic cartels as I also call them, through the Marxists in India took control of our social science institutions, of our social science research, there was a tremendous marginalization of the partition narrative. And therefore, very interestingly, we see that even Marxist leaders, communist leaders, who couldn't last 3 months in East Pakistan or East Bengal after independence. I mean, I think many of us know, but most of us, like Aftanji has said, because there's been this conspiracy of silence against this, against many episodes in history. but since we are discussing partition, that when West Bengal, when it was proposed that Bengal be divided, a large number of leading Bengali intellectuals came and stood beside by Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee's demand for the partition of Bengal. Interestingly, even the Congress leaders, Dr. Bidhan Chandra Roy, led by Dr. B.C. Roy, the entire Bengal Congress supported the demand for partition of Bengal, because they clearly realized, the Bengali Hindus and the Bengali Hindu leaders, the Bengali Hindu community leaders clearly realized that they have no future if the entire Bengal goes into Jinnah's Pakistan, and that was the initial plan. Now, what happened was that the communist, at that time it was the Communist Party of India, and why I'm just saying, getting into some detail here, I'll come back because it's directly linked to the manner in which our partition history has been dished out or disseminated in the last 70 years, especially in the last 50 years, since the 1960s. Now, the Communist Party of India also opposed the partition of Bengal. They said, we don't want Bengal to be partitioned, but what we certainly want, we want Bengal to remain intact as a province, but we want the entire Bengal to go into Pakistan. This was the stand of the Communist Party of India. But then they must have realized, when voting took place in the Bengal Assembly, the communists voted for the partition of Bengal. This is a very convenient truth that they keep hidden, that they keep hiding. But this year, under a lot of pressure, because we saw that this year there was a tremendous amount of discussion on the partition of Bengal, on why West Bengal was created, starting from June 20th till the birth anniversary of Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee on 6th July. There was a tremendous amount of discussion around the Bengal partition. And that's when the communists saw that for the last 50 years, they've tried to subdue and suppress this debate in West Bengal. This was not possible anymore. So they started saying that even we had supported the partition of Bengal. But this is the first time in 70 years, you hear the Indian communists accepting that they voted in favor of the partition of Bengal. But what happened after that was, they continued to support Pakistan. And when Dr. Mukherjee and Sardar Patel had made a demand that if Pakistan is unable to protect its minorities and is driving them out to India, then it must also part with commensurate portion of its land so that those minorities can be rehabilitated in India. This was a demand that Dr. Mukherjee had made. This was a demand that was supported by Sardar Patel. And we see in 1951, just a few months after the Indian Constitution came into effect, Nehru brings in the First Amendment. That is curtailing freedom of speech. And the main reason for bringing in the First Amendment was to curtail, was to ensure that Dr. Mukherjee doesn't raise the demand for a further partition of Pakistan. So it's a very interesting thing. Now, this is one part. Second is, a large number of communist leaders could not stay back in East Pakistan, East Bengal, and they came to West Bengal. They came as refugees. They fled from East Pakistan, East Bengal, because they couldn't, their party could not run there. Many of the communist leaders were imprisoned. Ila Mitra was especially one name. She was a very dynamic communist CPI leader, leading the tribals to revolt in Dinajpur area. She was taken, she was thrown into prison, tortured, and given life imprisonment. And when she was completely near dead, on parole, she was allowed and she came to Kolkata, never to go back. She became twice member of the Legislative Assembly of West Bengal, but she could never go back. As a communist, she could never go back to East Pakistan. Now, on this entire story of partition, what happened was that there was a very interesting and concerted attempt by the communist historians, by the communist opinion makers and gatekeepers of narrative, that you discussed what happened to you after you became a refugee and came to West Bengal. You discussed that. You wrote about it, you wrote poems, you wrote books, you wrote stories, you wrote novels, but you never discussed why you became a refugee in the first place. So you have this entire genre of literature in West Bengal, which will tell you what happened to refugees after they came to West Bengal, but which will never tell you why they became refugees in the first place. And if it was Nehru's demand that they go back, and many of them did go back, they were pushed back, why is it that they could not live in East Pakistan? Why is it that from January 1950, some of the most bloody pogroms, if you read A.J. Kamra's book that is brought out by the Voice of India publication, which was founded by Sitaram Goel, A.J. Kamra makes a collection of stories of pogroms in East Bengal, East Pakistan from 1950 to 1965. Heart-rending. I can give it to you in writing. You will not be able to go beyond 3 chapters in that book. It is so disconcerting. But all these were never discussed. Now, coming to, Somanjana, you please tell me when you want me to stop. Now, coming to the present in West Bengal. You see, the irony was that till the left front government came to power, till the communist government came to power, Jyoti Basu and his cohorts, what they did was they kept telling the Bengali Hindu refugees, and you may know that the Bengali Hindu refugees who came were then scattered into various parts of India. Andaman Nicobar, Dandakaranya, which is at that time in the 50s, the Dandakaranya project started. You know, and it's a beautiful description that historian Prafulla Chakravarti gives, that an entire race of people accustomed to lush green fields, accustomed to humid climate, accustomed to rivers, to boats, you suddenly transport them into the arid zones of Dandakaranya and ask them to eke out and start anew their living there. So all that the communists did during their years out of when they were not in power, they kept telling these refugees that once we are in power, we will rehabilitate you in West Bengal. And so in 77, when the Communist Party came to power, the CPIM came to power, the left front government came to power, the proletariat in the name of the proletariat. So these refugees started coming. They started coming as a natural process, that now that this government, which had promised us, is in power, we can come back to West Bengal, which is well a portion of all that they had left behind in East Bengal. It was similar, it was familiar to them. So they came to this island in Sundarban, Marijhapi, which is, you know, just in the estuary, Sundarban estuary, which is one side is Bangladesh, which reminded them of their ancestral land and their ancestral life, what they had left behind. And they started staying in Marijhapi in the island. And they told the communist government, look, we don't need any help from you. We don't need any support from you. We have become hardened enough to fend for ourselves. All that we want is for you to let us live here. The Congress government previously had also tried to stall that. And then we see in 79, the left front government, the Jyoti Basu's government, fires, kills thousands of these Dalit Hindu, they were Dalit Bengali Hindu refugees who had come and settled in Marijhapi. Because politically it was that this 10,000 refugees there, had they survived, had they started off a new life, it would have been challenge. It would have been a challenge to this theory of class conflict, to this theory of control that the communist parties across the world have always displayed in their systems. And so in the name of, and the most laughable part of is that thousands of these refugees were massacred, their hearts burned, their women raped, their bodies thrown to the sharks in the sea, their wells poisoned, their children hacked, all in the name of preserving the ecosystem of Sundarbans. This was Marijhapi. So interestingly, right from 1958 Amritsar Congress, the CPI had one of its Congress, one of its party meetings in Amritsar. And in 1958, from 1958 Amritsar Congress down to 1990s, most of the CPM leaders and members of parliament kept batting for the need of rehabilitating refugees and giving them citizenship. But when it came to doing that themselves, they massacred them. And the last point is, they did this in 79. And then in 2019, 40 years after that, when actually the Indian Parliament passed the Citizenship Amendment Act to give those very refugees citizenship, you see, at the forefront of anti-citizenship protests is the Islamist lobby, and Islamist lobby teamed up with the communist parties and the communist lobby in India, opposing again the granting of the citizenship to the Bengali Hindu refugees. And of course, the present state of West Bengal, there's it goes without saying that the present government in West Bengal is completely opposed to citizenship, granting citizenship to the Bengali Hindu refugees, because it's a captive government which runs itself on 30% of the Islamic vote, which is a block vote, which is the radical Islamic vote, which is there in West Bengal. It survives and subsists on that. And therefore, it has to make a show of violently opposing the granting of citizenship to the Bengali Hindu refugees. So in a sense, if you see, that saga is not yet over. It was, the major closure was in December 2019 when the Citizenship Amendment Act was passed by the Indian Parliament. But the second wave of struggle has started after that. And I'm certain once, this entire pandemic situation comes a little more in control, there's a little more relaxation in India in terms of lockdown. It's already there, but people get used to it. We'll again see resurfacing of anti-CA riots like what happened in Delhi. It is in Delhi, what happened was a clear case of Islamic radical penetration to what could have been a democratic protest against a democratically passed law in India. But that did not happen. So, so many forces, as Sukhi ji said, many forces have come into play now. Pakistan has always been active in Punjab. Pakistan has always tried to get control of Bangladesh and therefore, in a sense, create instability in West Bengal. You have the entire Jamaatul Mujahideen Bangladesh operatives in West Bengal. Every third day, someone or the other gets caught. Sometimes they don't get caught. So this is the current situation.
It's incredible. I mean, really, some of us being ethnic Bengalis, we can totally relate to the experience that you share that's been going on in this land, this horrific experience for, more than 70 years now. And, the saga is continuing in India, the saga is continuing in the United States, looking at everything that's happened since the abrogation of Article 370 in Kashmir, and now with the CAA, we are having hearing after hearing in the United States as if CAA is going to be in the ballot for the US election this November. It has come to that magnitude with the same lobby group that you have been talking about. So the diaspora is fighting the same narratives. Avitans, your take, you're the expert here.
Oh, I'm certainly not the expert, but I will say a few things here. I'll pick up from Sukhi ji, what he said. I had a very good fortune of having a good professors, like I said, in JNU. One of them is Professor Kapil Kapoor. He used to say that Guru Granth Sahib is the fifth Veda. So that's the level of connectivity we have. And we have, in Atharvaveda, there is a mantra that says, "O Lord, protect my motherland from all enemies, either with Shastra or Shastra." Okay, so there is a good tradition of defending the motherland from both sides, intellectually and with the weapons and that too. So we have a long tradition of fighter saints, and Khalsa is one of them in that series of fighter saints. Guru Gobind Singh. I'm from Patna, so I know Guru Gobind Sahib was a fighter, right? Khalsa Panth. And we also have Nath Panth, Guru Gorakhnath Panth. So these are all fighter saints. But what one of the things that I want to pick up on is on the trauma that people have been talking about here. All the panelists here, they have been talking about. And it is not just enough that we already had a transgenerational trauma of Islamic invasion and the destruction of temple. And Anirban Dada talked about Sitaram Goyal and his painstaking work on listing all the temples. You know, iconoclasm. I'm reading Meenakshi Jain's book on Flight of Deities. If that was not enough, you know, now we're still fighting the same kind of trauma. Look at where Pakistan is right now. What is happening to whoever is left in Pakistan, to Hindus. Every day we hear about, you know, temples being destroyed. Afghanistan, the Gurdwara massacre, huge massacre, in the hospital, you know, people. So we are still dealing with that trauma. There's no end. And this is all related to partition, like it or not. And people don't talk about it because that's not convenient for many scholars and academicians. We also don't talk about Mopla. Anirban mentioned it briefly. Okay, we don't talk about Khilafat. All the roots of the partition, you know, it's not in one day everything happened. It's a continuation. It's a continuum how it happened. Khilafat movement was one of them. And do you know, one of the persons involved in the Khilafat movement, though people project it as an agrarian crisis and all sorts of things, but in the end, it was Islamic State, the creation of an Islamic State in Kerala. And one of the person involved was Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, who became the famous education minister of India. You know, we don't talk about direct action day in Kolkata, right? How many people died? How many people know about this? How many people talk about it? How many research papers have been written about this? So the whole narrative, you know, we just confined it to one day and some of the things that are convenient to the prevalent narrative that was created by the Marxist and whoever leftist academicians, and they left it there.
Totally agree, Avatans. And then we have these uphill battle here constantly from these global lobby groups trying to tarnish our very identity, image, you know, our very history in the United States as well. And so we saw it, and when we tried to revise our history books in the California public schools and elsewhere, there were a tremendous amount of rioting and lobby groups, you know, working against it. So with that, Srinivas, do we have time for a couple of questions? I mean, if you have
any questions, I think in the chat box.
All right, I took a look at some of those. I mean, most of the conversations we had today was based on the curiosity and the questions coming from our global audience. And we are extremely grateful to Indic Academy for giving us this platform to continue with this very important discussion that's impacting people in India and the global diaspora. So before we end, I would like to invoke a Vedic Sanskrit mantra, which is a peace chant for the welfare, for peace and stability of our people worldwide. But before that, quickly, Sukhi and Anirban, if you have any closing comments for a few minutes. So Sukhi?
Somaji, thank you very much. And so I think Dr. Anirban, and he raised a very good question, especially the Bangladesh. The defeat of the Pakistan in the Bangladesh was the creation of the Khalistan on the other side, because that's where the Khalistan phenomena came in the picture, actually, because they were so embarrassed upon their defeat. The Pakistan army was so embarrassed to just get even. So that's where they came up with the multi-cut, the bleeding of India, the concept. So that's where they start, actually. So the Mr. Bhutto at that time, he mentioned to his inner circle that we will carve another Bangladesh, but it will be right next to our border. means actually what he was saying actually. So he was talking about the Punjab at the time, and so that's where the seed of the Khalistan was planted inside the Pakistan through the ISI with the help of the establishment over there. So that's why the whole phenomena of the Khalistan, it was never the demand of the Sikh people, it was the creation of the ISI and the Pakistani army. So that's why then they start working. Since then actually, so they are continuously working on them, and they are pumping too much money and too much, especially the drugs actually. So you could see the drugs in these days being pumped to the youth actually. So in the Punjab, that is also coming, that's a ISI and the Pakistan is deeply involved in that one. So that's one thing. The other side actually, so unfortunately, as we were talking about earlier, 1984, that time actually the killing of the Sikhs, right? We always talk about the killing of the Sikhs actually, so that has to be condemned everywhere actually. So I would call that was a genocide of the Sikhs for the 3 days by one specific political party, goons, right? That has to be. And I would like to demand through your medium, especially the government, whatever the effort they have done, and they should have done more actually. So there many cases have been reopened, and more needs to be done actually, because that is what going to put the balm on the wound of the Sikh community. But at the same time, not too many people talk about it, because the Hindu people, those who helped the Sikh people during that time, during these 3 days, they took the biggest risk. And I salute these people over there, because otherwise many girls, the ladies of the Sikh people could have been raped and killed. And that was actually, so because of that actually, because we cannot separate Hindu and Sikhs, because it was not Hindu versus Sikhs or riots, because the riots happen two party actually when the fight, right? This was a well managed, calculated genocide of these people, those who had no even idea what was happening in the Pakistan, like what was happening at that time inside the Punjab. So that needs to be condemned. And also another very important part actually, because Dr. Anirban, I was reading your book actually. So when last year I came from India, and I have your book. This is the book. I have this one. In this book, actually, so you have mentioned one thing, because traveling is very important, because when you have to change the narrative, actually, because your interaction with the people is very important for anything, even for the political reason too. Actually, that's the way you are able to connect. That is like I was thinking, because that is the concept of the Guru Nanak Dev Ji. So that's why Guru Nanak Dev Ji, 26,000 miles he has to travel around, not only within Punjab, actually throughout India. And he went to all the Sikh, like not only Sikh, actually, he reached out to all Hindu religions, right? And even the Muslim religion too. So that the concept, the dialogue actually, so is very important, because we should not give up actually, because the dialogue should be open. The concept, even with any radicals actually, all right, if you have an issue, all right, end of the day, we have to sit down on the table, we have to talk about it, because we cannot just keep giving them the freedom. These people needs to be asked actually, so they has to be questioned, the narrative has to be changed. We have to step out, not only on the Zoom call actually. So like I do, I would like to go out and talk to these people, because it is not the activity of these rascals, but inactivity of the good people which can destroy the society. And that is exactly happening in my Sikh community, because Sikhs are very brave people, very hardworking people, very loyal to India. But unfortunately, they have moved on, and it's like, we don't want to mess these people actually, some of the goons. And now they are taking advantage actually. So all these people, some of these people, like few hundred of those around the world actually, so they are giving the bad name to the Sikh community. The philosophy of Guru Gobind Singh, Guru Nanak Dev Ji is being destroyed by these goons, and that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sukhi, for this passionate rendition of what needs to be done. And we look up to you for leadership, definitely. And the conversation needs to go on. Anirban, anything that you would like to tell us and our global audience? And a lot of people from India are also joining in tonight. So fantastic discussion. I wish we could continue more, but Anirban, your thoughts.
I just have 3 points to make. I'm actually very flattered. Sukhi ji has flashed my book. I'm so delighted that he's read it and he's liked it. Um, so there are 2, 3 things I just wanted to make. Avtansi mentioned Kapil ji. Kapil Kapoor ji has had a lot of influence on many of us. And he also speaks of one thing. He says that there has to be a sense of we should never lose the sense of the adversary. Shatru Bodh. That, because whenever we lose the sense of who our adversary is, or who or what our adversaries or who they are, will not be able to really strategize our defense. And as Sri Aurobindo calls it, defense should not be a passive defense. It should be an aggressive defense. The other is, Professor Arvind Sharma has that very interesting framework that he says, insider to outsider. We should start as insiders, start speaking out to outsiders, and not allow outsiders to control our narrative. And of course, you see, you have a partition museum in Amritsar, but till date, there is no partition museum in West Bengal. So I really appeal to the entire diaspora, to the global audience, that whenever a possibility arises, because you can't expect the present rulers, the present government in West Bengal to even think of something like this. 35 years, the Communist Party, the Left Front has never done something like that. Hopefully, when there's change in West Bengal, a much anticipated and a much needed change, the entire Bengali Hindu community must come from across the world and come together and erect a grand partition museum in West Bengal. So that, why was it that Bengal, a province with 2 time zones, so rich, with so much potential, such a nodal central province in India, had to be divided? That history and the millions of people who have suffered, that history is never forgotten by coming generation of Bengalis. And that no one else, no ideology, no political party will have the temerity to try and even think that the history of partition can be erased from the psyche of the Bengali Hindus. I think these are the points I wanted to.
Thank you, and deeply appreciate your thoughts. We deeply appreciate your presence, all the 3 panelists. Thank you for your time and commitment to the cause of our people, our motherland, Janmabhoomi, Matribhoomi. And with that, I would like to render the Vedic peace mantra. Please join me. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamiva avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you, everybody. Namaste.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thanks to Indic Academy for inviting me. It's been a great experience. And I'm really delighted to connect with Avtansji and with Sukhiji. And I look forward to remaining in touch. And it has been extremely inspiring to listen to all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, the feelings are mutual.
I deeply appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Look forward to continuing the dialogue. Namaste.
Namaste. Namaste. Namaste.